Welcome to this explainer. In modern true crime history, there are very few cases that give us such a terrifying contrast between appearance and reality. Today, we are deconstructing a mystery that absolutely obsessed a nation. It's a case that really forces us to ask, how well do we truly know the people sleeping right next to us?
Okay, picture this. It's April 2003. Detectives intercept a man named Scott Peterson at a golf course down near the Mexican border. Now, this is a guy whose pregnant wife has been missing for months. But instead of looking like a frantic, heartbroken husband desperately searching for his family, he looks exactly like a man on the run. He's dyed his hair and goatee this bizarre, bright blonde. His car is completely packed with almost $15,000 in cash, survival gear, 4 different cell phones, and get this, his brother's driver's license. It is the absolute portrait of desperation. But to understand how we actually get to this incredibly suspicious scene, we have to hit rewind. We have to ask, how did a seemingly perfect life unravel so completely?
Let's start with Part 1, the perfect American family.
To the outside world, the sheer normalcy these two projected was just undeniable. Scott and Laci Peterson were literally college sweethearts. They met at a restaurant where Scott was working, and by all accounts, they were the golden couple. They had this beautiful home in a really nice neighborhood in Modesto, California, solid jobs, the whole 9 yards. In 2002, Laci, who was just 27 and known by literally everyone for her vibrant, bubbly personality, was thrilled because they were expecting their first child, a little boy. They were going to name him Connor. The nursery was painted, all the preparations were done. They were just completely ordinary, highly trusted, and deeply loved by their community. If you looked at their holiday photos, everything appeared absolutely, perfectly happy.
But then comes Part 2, a Christmas Eve nightmare.
On the morning of December 24, 2002, the entire foundation of this mystery gets laid out in a very specific timeline. So according to Scott, he leaves Laci at 9:30 a.m. He says she was just sitting comfortably, watching a Martha Stewart special about meringues, getting ready to walk their golden retriever Mackenzie. But then, at 10:18 a.m., a neighbor finds the dog wandering completely alone in the neighborhood with its muddy leash still attached and kindly puts the dog back in the yard. Well, hours pass. It isn't until 5:15 p.m. that Scott finally returns home. He takes a shower, eats some pizza, washes his clothes, and then finally calls Laci's mom, Sharon. And the absolutely crucial point here is his phrasing, right? When a loved one isn't home, you usually ask, hey, are they over there? But Scott doesn't do that. He specifically tells her mother that Laci is missing. Instantly, this tight-knit Modesto community mobilizes. The response is massive, and it's frantic. You've got hundreds of neighbors leaving their own families on Christmas Eve to walk the streets with flashlights. There are helicopters circling with searchlights, thousands of flyers being printed up, and eventually, a reward pool that climbs to $500,000. You can literally feel the heartbreak. But behind the scenes, sort of watching from the periphery, detectives were already asking themselves a really dark question. Was this a tragic disappearance or something more? Because almost immediately, investigators realized that Scott's behavior just doesn't match the horrific reality of a guy whose pregnant wife just vanished into thin air.
Which brings us to Section 3, cracks in the facade.
While Laci's family is completely breaking down in panic on national television, weeping and pleading for a safe return, the private reality behind closed doors is vastly different. Scott is exhibiting what seasoned detectives actually described as a disaffectedly distant attitude. He isn't crying, he isn't frantic, he outright refuses to take a police polygraph test. And as investigators start digging a little deeper, they uncover some incredibly disturbing details. They find out he had just added pornographic channels to his cable package days after Laci vanished. He even looked into selling their house and actually tried to trade in Laci's Land Rover. It's this terrifying, glaring contrast between public expectation and his private reality.
And this disconnect became glaringly public during his famous interview with journalist Diane Sawyer. The tension in that room was just extraordinary, and America was watching and reacting in real time. When Sawyer directly presses him about the possibility of murder and the grim prospect of searching for a body, Scott replies using this very clinical, bizarre word. He calls it a resolution. And honestly, worse than that, as he says it, he offers this highly inappropriate kind of smirk-like smile. It left millions of viewers totally stunned and unsettled. Why on earth is he smiling when discussing the possibility of finding his pregnant wife's dead body?
So, why did investigators become so profoundly suspicious of him so early on? What massive, life-altering secret was Scott Peterson hiding behind that calm, arrogant exterior?
Let's look at Part 4, the double life revealed.
Enter Amber Frey.
She was a massage therapist from Fresno, and she contacts the police on December 30th with an absolute bombshell revelation. She was actively dating Scott Peterson, and the timeline of their relationship reveals a level of dark premeditation that completely shifts this entire investigation. So they met in late November, with Scott claiming he was totally single and looking for a serious relationship. But then comes December 9th. Remember, that's 2 full weeks before Laci even disappears. On that day, Scott sits down with Amber and tells her a devastating lie. He tells her he had lost his wife, and that this upcoming Christmas would be his first holiday without her. Think about that. He was preparing his alibi before a crime had even been reported.
Working closely with the police, Amber bravely starts recording her phone calls with Scott. And what those tapes reveal is, frankly, psychologically disturbing. On New Year's Eve, the Modesto community holds this massive, deeply emotional candlelight vigil for Laci. Her family is up on stage, they're weeping, holding candles in the freezing cold. But Scott? He isn't on stage with them. No, he's standing way in the back of the crowd, on his cell phone with Amber Frey. While surrounded by literally hundreds of posters of his missing pregnant wife, he is spinning this elaborate romantic lie, telling his girlfriend that he's currently spending his New Year's Eve at a celebration in Paris. He is actively romancing another woman at a vigil for his missing wife.
But here's the thing. Despite this sickening revelation, investigators still faced a massive legal hurdle. Because, let's be honest, deception, infidelity, and narcissism, they make you a terrible husband, sure, but they don't automatically prove murder in a court of law. The prosecution desperately needed physical evidence to match the psychological deception. Weeks are dragging into months. The investigation feels like it's hit a brick wall. So which gruesome clue finally changed everything?
That brings us to Part 5, the Bay and the Trial.
In mid-April 2003, 4 agonizing months after Laci vanished, the grim answer finally arrives. Along the Richmond shoreline of the San Francisco Bay, a couple out walking their dog makes a horrifying discovery: the remains of a male fetus in the marshland. And the very next day, a deeply decomposed female torso washes ashore just a mile away. DNA quickly confirms the devastating truth. It was Laci and baby Connor. And the turning point that breaks this entire case wide open? The bodies were found exactly where Scott claimed he had gone fishing alone on that rainy Christmas Eve morning.
With the bodies discovered, the prosecution is suddenly able to assemble a massive mountain of circumstantial evidence. Detectives painstakingly track his cell phone data, proving he was exactly in the area where the bodies later surfaced. They find a secretly purchased 14-foot aluminum boat sitting in his warehouse, a boat he hadn't mentioned to anyone, not even his family. They find concrete debris on his boat trailer that perfectly matches the distinct size of a bucket. And crucially, when they bring a certified canine scent dog named Trimble to the Berkeley Marina, the dog picks up Laci's scent, tracking it right down the pier to the exact boat dock Scott had used.
But all that circumstantial evidence really needed a physical anchor. Because Laci's remains had been subjected to the harsh, degrading environment of the San Francisco Bay for months, traditional forensic evidence was almost completely washed away. That's why investigators turned to advanced mitochondrial DNA testing. And they find their smoking gun. A single strand of hair, matching Laci's mitochondrial DNA, is found tightly wedged in the teeth of a pair of needle-nose pliers, sitting right inside Scott's secret boat. This physically links Laci to a boat she supposedly knew absolutely nothing about.
Now, in the courtroom, both sides fiercely debated how to interpret this exact same physical evidence. The prosecution argues a horrifying, calculated theory that Scott used a 90-pound bag of cement to make 5 distinct concrete anchors, using them to weigh Laci's body down in the icy waters of the bay. The defense, however, neutrally counters this by arguing that Scott simply made one single anchor for his newly purchased boat and then used the rest of the wet concrete to legitimately repair his driveway. They point out to the jury that, hey, despite extensive searches by police dive teams, no extra anchors were ever found at the bottom of the bay.
Which leads us into our final section, the lingering mysteries.
So despite Scott Peterson's ultimate conviction and life sentence, the defense continues to challenge the narrative, and they maintain several alternate theories to this very day. For instance, they frequently point to a reported burglary across the street from the Petersons' home, though the exact timeline of whether that break-in happened on the 24th or the 26th remains highly debated. They also emphasize the complete lack of direct DNA evidence, blood, or a definitive crime scene inside the Covina Avenue home. And actually, more recently, the Los Angeles Innocence Project has even taken up the case. They've officially requested new DNA testing on a blood-stained mattress that was found inside a burned-out van near the home right around the time of the disappearance.
All of this brings us back to a terrifying central question. How could someone who appeared to be a completely ordinary, successful, loving father-to-be become the center of one of America's most shocking criminal cases? It's that terrifying gap between the smiling holiday photographs of an all-American couple and the dark, calculated deceptions uncovered by detectives that makes this case so impossible to look away from. So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder. Does the massive mountain of circumstantial evidence, the contradictory timeline, the cold premeditation with Amber Frey, and the deeply disturbing fact that the bodies washed up exactly where he went fishing, does all of that prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? Or, as the defense still claims 2 decades later, could the true story of what happened to Laci and Connor still be out there? We've walked through the timeline, we've looked at the evidence, now it's up to you to decide for yourself.